You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and I have Meghan Lamb. So excited to have you on the show, and welcome to the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I always I try to tell how I encountered the art of my guests. So I want to tell you a little bit. So I go up to Portland quite a bit, Portland, Oregon, in Powell's Bookstore, which is a union bookstore, staffed by union workers. And what's happened over the last few years, I've gotten a lot more into alternative, small press, zines. And for the longest time, I would never really dig in there. And they had your book. My partner Jenny found it and said, "Well, this is the one we're gonna get," and then was excited to encounter your music as well, and kill scenes that you do as well in encountering your art. I wanted to start, Meghan, and ask you about the things you create. When did you see yourself as an artist, as a creator?
Oh, gosh. I mean, there are many different variations of that question. The answer that I often give for my students when they ask how I first became a writer, they're usually asking how I first became a writer that published their writing, that was writing beyond the shadows of the process behind the screen. And I had been writing, and I'd been on Literary Magazine and whatnot when I was in high school, but I didn't have. I had family members who were involved in opera, but I don't think I ever thought that I would become a writer as a viable creative option for some reason. Yeah. My mom thought for a long time that I would be a lawyer, and told people for a long time that I would be a lawyer, even though I had no designs on being a lawyer when I was an undergrad. And then when I graduated and was kind of floundering for what to do next, for some reason, the only viable careers my parents came up with were you can be a teacher or you can be a dentist. And I have repulsion toward mouths. I read somewhere at some point that dentists have the highest suicide rate of
I heard that
profession.
Too. Yeah.
And I understand why. Mouths are disgusting. Touching them is abhorrent. I would never want to be a dentist. But yeah, in my can't remember if it was it was my senior year, definitely my senior year of undergrad. I didn't take writing classes in undergrad. I was a communication and culture major at Indiana University, which is kind of media and rhetoric studies. But I had this class, I forget what the class even was, but the final was to either write an ethnography of different generations of your family. And the professor was really interested in experimental ethnography, narrative ethnography.
Yeah.
She wrote a series of wonderful books about, based on interviews with people who believed they had been abducted by aliens.
Yeah.
That kind of, I guess now you might even call it a kind of autofiction, but it's basically interweaving her reportage and her research with kind of the experience of being in the field and her personal perspective on it. But I wrote an ethnography of my grandmother, mother, and me, and kind of examined our different comings of age as women via this fairy tale that my grandmother used to tell me when I was a kid. And my professor kind of pulled me aside and was like, this is a really interesting piece of experimental fiction. You should publish this. And I hadn't really been setting out to write a piece of fiction. I hadn't thought of it that way. It wasn't necessarily my first time writing fiction, but I think it was kind of accidentally my first encounter with the kind of fiction I wanted to write by way of me accidentally writing that thing. And for years, like, it was really difficult for me to write a follow-up story just because I wanted to write something as innovative in its approach to what fiction could be as what I had accidentally written before.
Yeah.
But that ended up not only being the first short story I published, but it ended up being kind of my way into thinking about fiction as this expanded thing and as this expanded possibility. But yeah, it feels very backwards in a lot of ways to teach creative writing now and encounter like some of my colleagues' ideas of what it means to teach about craft and some of my students' ideas via their exposure to other dialogues that I wasn't exposed to at their age about what craft means. Because my introduction to craft was, oh, that thing that you wrote is fiction. It is. Publish it. Okay. And then I kind of learned about writing by way of publishing and reading literary magazines and discovering my strange peers, such as they are.
Yeah, well, there's something, I mean, just as a little point within it, there's something about, I've read a massive amount ever since I was a kid, or listened to books, and there's something about I don't know what you use, experimental, but fiction or poetry, whether it's by the structure or by how it's formed and what it's saying, that remains like so fresh. Like you can always read something within writing that is messing or feels edgy on that. And that's something that's so exciting about that within writing. I felt that within your work. I was like, when I was reading Coward, your book, I was like, I always like this aspect when I'm reading of like, wait a second, you can't do that. Like that there's something there that's like so surprising. In your comments, were you getting that and feeling that what you're supposed to do with writing is more heavily defined, or you have to fight against that, some of those structures and form, or was your environment where you felt free to experiment?
Well, I was publishing for like 15 years before I decided to get my MFA. So I kind of had my own renegade, self-driven education by way of just discovering things. So I was fortunate in a lot of ways to come about my understanding of what it means to be a writer without this set expectation of what you could and couldn't do. Yeah. I always tell my students now that if you aren't constantly trying to get away with something, then you haven't really found your voice or what you want to do as a writer.
I like what you just said. I'm sorry.
I think that's an important part of the process, is trying to do things that shouldn't be done. And hopefully that extends to music as well. Although I don't feel like I can really take credit for that necessarily, or in the same way in music, because it's a collaborative process. But writing also, more than people necessarily acknowledge or are conscious of, is a collaborative process. No book is really written in a vacuum or by one author. It's always written in a kind of echo chamber, even if it's a weird subconscious echo chamber of other voices and other influences and other conversations.
Yeah, I had mentioned I encountered your music, and I was like, oh wow, and a cover of "Short Term Effect" by The Cure. I'm like, okay, okay, I bumped into the right spot. I was excited to see. I was excited to see that project. "Short Term Effect." The song. I heard that cover, and it's quite amazing. By the way,
I'm
and
so glad that you liked it. We got a pretty across the board positive response, but the critical responses that we've gotten made me laugh a lot.
no. Let me. And here's the thing. First, I want to talk about that because like I'm an obsessive Cure fan, right? So when I first saw the title, I'm excited. Oh, Meghan Lamb. Oh, this too. In the band Kill Scenes. And I saw a Short Term Effect, and I would say, you got some balls. That's not an easy song to even. What do you do with it? There's some of the stuff in The Cure, which is just with the mood and the elements. It's just like, oh, but the song drops into that. Like you capture it, and it's a different version. And I was like, holy shit, because for me, that's a tough one in my Cure head, like to like to do. So you hit it, and so I was really stoked in hearing that and hearing the other music. But tell me about like tell me about song, and tell me about like why you're doing that and what that's like, putting that together in your other music.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of Sean's choice of song. Yeah, I don't know how far back with the band to go. The band originally started as me and Sean 13 years ago. Wow. Um, uh, but I had. Uh, we had gone to undergrad together. We had lived in Bloomington, Indiana at the same time, and we Bloomington, Indiana, when we went to school there, had a really thriving like basement show and house show culture. There were always like 3 or 4 punk shows going on every night of the week. Nobody ever made plans to hang out because you just knew that you would see whoever you wanted to see at the show, or you wouldn't, and you'd see them at a different show,
Yeah.
which was fun and frustrating. But yeah, we were sort of like always orbiting around each other and like friendly in that way, but also like never knew when we were going to run into one another, because that's kind of how Bloomington music worked. But we both moved to Chicago after undergrad, and did a couple other things after that, or before that, or and in any event. I'm trying to think of like when this incident. Shortly before I moved to Chicago, I can't remember what we were doing, but somehow I found myself visiting Chicago with some friends, and we were doing karaoke, and I was singing a bunch of Kate Bush songs, and that was kind of how Sean got it into his head that he wanted to make a band with me, hearing me sing these Kate Bush songs. But he sent me this long, kind of awkward, adorable message asking me to be in a band with him. And looking back on it, he says that he didn't expect me to respond favorably, but I responded like 5 minutes after he sent it. And I was like, sure, of course. When
Yeah.
can we start?
Yeah.
And I like got together with him that evening, and we recorded our first song. He had like some like a rough track and like some bits and bobs of lyrics in this little notebook that looks like a video cassette. And I got together with him that evening, and I helped him fill in the rest of the lyrics, and then we recorded the song after we wrote it. And that was kind of how we went about all the rest of the songs on the album. He'd have kind of a rough track, and we'd figure out what else we wanted to happen with it, and we'd kind of write the lyrics together. It's a lot more of him putting together the track in advance these days because we don't have quite as much time. And also, there's the whole thing where I moved out of the city and moved around and did other things and came back 2 years ago. And I was coming, the band had existed as different iterations of itself in my absence. So I just kind of messaged Sean. I was like, I moved back to Chicago. I don't know if you'd be interested in working together again, but I could maybe like do guest vocals on a song here or there. He's like, what are you saying? We started the band together. You're back in the band.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we... this is our 5th album that we're putting together now. I'm not sure how the covers are going to end up in relation to the album. I know that we have kind of a series of covers. One that's already recorded by Snowy Red. It's actually like his cover of Mark Bolan, David Bowie song that was unfinished that they worked on together.
Oh, really? I love Mark Bolan.
And we have 2 other mystery covers that Sean apparently has the tracks for. And he won't tell me what they are until he's done with them. But in his words, I'm going to shit myself. So hopefully they're going to be good.
Hey, talk about a teaser here. We that's all the information we got with Meghan, but
he said like one of them I'm going to shit myself like, oh wow, that's so good, and the other one I'm going to shit myself because it's funny. So I don't know what that means, but I'm looking forward to finding out.
Well, we'll have links so everybody can stay in touch with what those will be, and they can make their determination. I was I really dig on the sound in the music, and I just had this recent thing with that I've been trying or maybe thinking about a little bit with dancing in goth clubs. You know, like I'm 51. I've never been a big dancer, but I like to dance. It's been more like an opportunity when I get out. And I had a conversation with a guest, the singer Pieta Brown, and we just ended up talking about dancing. And I was starting to think about it more. And I went out this past weekend. I had one of the most amazing weeks and intense weeks that I've had in my day job working in labor. For labor unions, but also like on the weekend, went out 2 nights in a row to a goth club and like danced. And I got to tell you, like for me, it was 2 things. It was both in my head and my body, right? Like I just like danced in like really enjoyable, really good environment. But the other thing was like, there's this freedom that exists like in goth music and goth scene, both in gender or like celebration of darkness, which is in turn a celebration of life. There's this deep freedom in that environment that I had been in before that just felt so good. And I was like, man, I'm liking like just creating a new habit of going out dancing at a goth club. And the thing is too, Meghan, was like kind of like the freedom of association and talking to people. Look, it's Portland, Oregon. Not everybody's a gem, right? Like it's who knows, right? But it was like a friendly and open in a way that I don't know, it's just felt really good. So I've been diving back into that, and on the time, talking about the Cure and such. But for me, it was far more profound than like, hey, I like that Cure song, and it was like a deep experience. So like I'm excited to connect into that and then to listen to that music because it's far more for me. It was far more important just recently for me. And so the main point is I went dancing, Megan.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure you weren't the only 51-year-old there. But that's part of what I love so much about some of the shows that we've been playing over the last 2 years is that um, there's I feel like a lot of diversity, at least in the Chicago like dark music scene.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
I see people of all different races, like everyone from like age 21 to like 61.
All right, 61. Good, 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 good.
No, no, I doubt you were even remotely the oldest person there.
No, they didn't. Like I wasn't. I was like throwing it because I was thinking about it in the context because the number was only important in the sense that this is an idea I'm embarking
Mm-hmm.
on now, and I would like late 20s. I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I used to go to a great goth bar, and another thing too is I don't drink anymore, and I drank then.
Uh-huh.
And so like now it's not drinking and like more like energy expenditure, and it isn't like the club drinking for me. So it's different in that way. But really dig on the environment. And Chicago, when you mentioned Chicago, I adore Chicago. And I think the industrial, maybe dark wave scene there, some of the history of Chicago, and music in Chicago just has a great feel for me. And I think industrial, I think goth. And is it a pretty big scene there still?
It is, but it's gosh, it's a really competitive. Well, I mean, it's not a competitive scene in the sense that there isn't camaraderie between musicians, because I feel like it's a very generously engaged community, but there's just like so much going on. It's so hard to break through past a certain level. I feel like anymore, I know tons and tons of musicians who are kind of parallel to us, or like uh, in a friend group with us. But when I'm trying to like find a headliner for a show or someone who's going to like get people out to a show on a weeknight, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
You mentioned Milwaukee. Are you originally from Milwaukee?
So I have a story in my life where I head west. So I was born and grew up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And but I lived in Wisconsin for 12 years. When I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I was studying philosophy. So I'd be credentialed for my podcast, studying masters in philosophy at Marquette, and a bunch of my other time in nearby Madison. So I'd head into Milwaukee quite a bunch. Love that music scene, metal. I'm a metalhead too. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, yeah. I was excited to get to Milwaukee because it was such a different scene and music scene, and uh, really enjoy the metal there. And when I got out, I'm in Oregon now. When I got out here, I was shocked and excited by how big metal was in the Pacific Northwest. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I'm really big into doom and stoner metal. So there's a lot of that out here. But when we're talking Chicago and Portland, we're talking two good music scenes here. Yeah, and Milwaukee. I adore Milwaukee. So all right, Megan, I got a big question for you. A big
Okay.
question. What is art? What is art?
Oh my God. art is like I don't know, like a strange spasm of the brain on one hand, and on the other hand, it's like a practice that you get into that's the only way life is livable. So
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
combination of those two things,
Yeah.
and sometimes those two things that art is feel like they mesh together. Sometimes they feel like they're combative with one another. But I I think in sometimes at the same time, sometimes in spurts there it can be both things.
Yeah, that dynamic that you described makes a lot of sense to me. I haven't heard it described in that way. I like that. So tell us about the most recent book, the one I found in the great bookstore, Powell's Coward. Tell us about that, and
Yeah, and
maybe.
I have to ask out of personal curiosity,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that
yeah,
the
yeah,
first thing I've written that you've read?
yes,
I
yes,
love that. That
yeah,
makes me so happy. A lot of people, like, if they see my novel for sale at a place and they also see that more novella length book,
hmm,
um, they buy the novel because it looks like the bigger, more important book.
hmm.
Which I nothing against my own novel. That press in particular is my favorite small press right now. Apocalypse Party. Ben DeVos is such a great guy in so many ways. Also, great taste in music.
Oh,
Also a
good to hear.
metalhead,
Yeah,
but
all right, all right.
uh, yeah, Coward is definitely the most personal and personally exposing thing I've ever written. So I feel very tenderly toward it. It was written kind of um, with a person in mind, the first person I ever had like a I don't want to say a crush, like first person I was ever in love with, like in much in the way the female adolescent character is in this book. Um, but she's still one of my best friends in the world, and she lives actually a couple blocks over from me. And my husband and I are really close friends with her and her husband, and we still hang out all the time.
Wow.
Um, I I know she has a copy of this book, and I think she has read some of it. She hasn't talked about it with me yet.
Oh,
I'll be very curious to hear from her eventually, maybe someday. But
the podcast needs a little intrigue. Drop that in there. That's cool.
but yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no. I'm excited to hear about your response to it. No, yeah, I bumped into it and grabbed it, and quite, I've been just not to just to expand just a little bit on the show. I've had the ability at times, like when it comes to writing, the writers that I've had on, writers and poets, they always feel like this like strong energy or experimentation or deep importance of what's talking about, or transgressive or open and experimental, and there's so much energy in that. I think sometimes if people get cynical or stodgy around literature, they're just not looking at the right section, or they're caught up in some habits. So, in describing the book, as you said, with being personal and what was it? What was it? The piece that you were excited about me getting it was that. Do people veer away from it, or was it like you said, as they go to the other thing? You're excited to hear
oh,
like
I
this
think it's
one.
just that it's short. It's a skinnier book. People like the big book.
Right, right. Well, if you buy Tolstoy and you calculate it per page, and you got a good used book price, it's like this is half a cent, half a cent a page. I'm getting value. Go into Coward some more. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I mean, yeah, it. It's my most recent book that I've published, but it feels like I published it very recently, and also feels like a long time ago. In part because I published. I'm realizing I published 3 books during the pandemic, which uh, what a time to publish 3 books. But that's part of why time feels so amorphous in relation to these books coming out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was kind of like 2 different projects that I had wanted to write for a while were something related to the experience of living in Spokane for the weird brief window that I did, where there were the forest fires, especially in
Oh,
the latter part of the summer, and there was literally like black smog engulfing the whole sky, and it looked like it was like the dead of night in the middle of the day, and we had to keep our windows closed and stay inside, and it was like 110 degrees, and we didn't have air conditioning,
oh my
and
God.
it still just smelled like burning everywhere, and
Yeah.
I felt like I was going insane.
I did too.
And yeah, I wanted to write something about that. And sadly, I only lived in Spokane during that period of the summer where
Oh,
it's
good.
like
Great
probably the
timing.
worst time to live there.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. Yeah.
when it's a long story, but when I moved out, like that was like the day that I left was like the first nice day that I'd had there. It was like October, and the leaves were turning, and there wasn't black smoke in the sky, and there
What
was
could
this
have been?
lovely
What could have been?
mist. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess we feel most tenderly about a place the day that we're leaving it, but I I I always felt like Spokane in many ways feels like Midwest Rust Belt town
Yeah.
in the Pacific Northwest, depending on what you consider the Pacific Northwest. So I really wanted to write something about fires in Spokane, especially since my first novel uh, deals with an underground fire, a different kind of fire. But I wanted to write that, and I wanted to write a book about uh, this like kind of first relationship I ever had, even though I don't know if anyone would consider a relationship where um, uh, it was like a deep friendship, but the relationship was kind of through this imagined, well, just like it is in the book, like this kind of weird role playing over the internet. Um, and I don't know. At some point in the pandemic, I think it was the experience of like feeling like all of my friendships were taking place over the internet, and like everything existed in this kind of ether,
Yeah.
this ether of liminal contact. Um, I think that somehow was what gave me the idea of synthesizing these 2 books that I had wanted to write for a while. Um, and what more natural time to sit inside and communicate over a dark screen than when there
Yeah.
are black fires consuming the sky and you can't go outside.
I wanted to before I'm going to ask you to read a little bit from Coward, but before that, I wanted to talk about. I had that deep, visceral response to the fires that you're talking about in the summer there, in the deep heat and the apocalypse. As far as my brain, just like how I saw it, like I was in Mid Valley in Oregon, right, and I think about in terms of natural disasters, right? So I grew up on the East Coast. Hurricane once in a while, you get used to a hurricane, and when I lived in the Midwest, tornadoes, which scared the shit out of me more than anything in the entire universe. It's like
They
I don't
scared the
understand.
shit out of me, but they were also kind of exhilarating.
Oh, I'll look at them. I'll look at video. Like I can watch it. Could not be more fascinated. Scared the living shit out of me to my core. And then like out here, so there's these fires going on, right? And it's during the pandemic. And the fires were so extreme, I forgot a pandemic was going on. Honestly, I was like, we're going to be burnt to a crisp. But it happened because, so you remember, I grew up in those different geographies, and this is the first time this happened in Pacific Northwest, where these fires and how they're blowing like towards like the cities, and they're like, winds better shift, things need to change because these things are blowing across. And I was like walking around. I asked people because like you ask people who always lived there, and I'm like, oh, so like what do you do? And they're like, we've never seen this before. But in my head at that time, I thought that this is something maybe everybody reacted to. And once people said that to me, that like they had no clue, I was like, I'm so scared right now. I'm like, can I talk to somebody about what's going to happen or what we should be doing? Because I'm looking at it and the fires are blowing this way, and then winds died down, shifted and all that stuff, and there was still all this smoke. But I was like so weirded out and freaked out by it. I was like, people, like, what do we do? Like hell's coming. So I remember those fires.
It makes you realize that hell was there all along.
Talking to the quick writer, turn that phrase. Yeah, absolutely. So you gonna read us some Coward?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just read a bit from the beginning. I was debating whether to read one of the dead body parts, but I'll just read a bit from the beginning. The sky is burning up again the way it does each August, like some ritual, some letting out of blood. It smells a bit of blood, of iron, say the people from this town. Some say it smells like ore, dark sediment, charred skin. Meanwhile, the factories that used to make their own gray streams of sediment stand still and silent, gathering the drifts. It always starts out with the blonde hairs of the hills standing on edge, bristled and ready with their bleedy scabs of brush. The smoke begins to rise, a shimmer hover over cracked soil, snake skins, and the ache-stretched skeleton ribs of old rail lines. The shimmer turns to shadows, turns to ash. The sky turns gray, then darker gray, then black. The mountain forests burn, the winds rise, winds of clouds of hot debris, of smoldering destruction carried through the high plains. Don't worry, someone tells you, for you haven't lived through other Augusts here. No, you do not know. No, you are not used to this. They come in August. Yes, they burn their way through August. And we stay in, wait until September, but it passes every year. Don't worry, they insist, for you look skeptical. Don't worry. It is natural. It is a part of life. A cleansing process. Yes, a learning process. How to learn to wait in hot, dark rooms, looking out windows till it's safe to go outside. Outside, among the shadows of the factories, the zombies gather. In their certain alleys, certain streets they've marked with piss and shit and needles and used big gulps that were filled with who the fuck knows what. The streets that everybody knows to not go down. Inside, among the shadows of a curtained room, he lies, naked and pale, across the bare slab of his mattress. He has it out again, the picture that she sent him, that he knows he shouldn't keep of her, of them, Kate McLean's perfect breasts. The perfect breasts are as they always are and always will be, rounded, pointed, and resplendent in the dim light, glowing globes of milk glass in the dim light, bowls of soft fog in the dim light, cusps of cold skin, there but not there, here held in his pinched hand in the dim light. He runs the other hand over the slick bulge of his belly, feels the pain of it digesting what he just consumed. A meal of cigarettes and condiments, whatever shit he left in the fridge, whole jars of olives, pickles, tube of yellow mustard, a few desperate scrapings of some old congealed marmalade, and something else that tasted sweet but now tastes sour. He feels so full and so unsatisfied. He hisses in between soft teeth. His mouth reeks of Virginia Slims and pickle juice. The room is dry waves of this sealed warmth, but he feels wet with what he doesn't understand, with longing or with loneliness. No, it isn't loneliness, he thinks, tapping his raw nails on the Polaroid's ridge, wishing but not wishing she was ever there. The perfect breasts are there. The perfect breasts are what he has. The perfect breasts are smirking at the seething of his belly bulge. He knows that Kate McLean would say, "Why are you doing that? What do you want? What are you doing? What is wrong with you?" It is this, the raw new nerves, the underskin itch. It is this, the shining scabs of his scalp, the cragged lines of his chin. And this, the sad, inevitable swelling of his cock. And this, the weird rise of a pain that has no surface.
Was that your answer to what is art?
Yeah, the weird rise of a pain that has no surface. That seems like a pretty good answer.
Yeah. I struggle after a great reading. I just want to say thank you, Megan. Thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you, Ken.
Yeah,
It's my honor.
Yeah.
Thank you for appreciating it.
Yeah. I on the show, in doing it over a few years, when I started, I didn't know like what performances or what experiences would be there. But I've been really excited. Actually released a spoken word episode. I'll try to track down and get over to you. You might dig it. It's short. It's like 10 minutes, but I've had that in the shows, and I've had like 3 Dublin poets, and spoken word and other authors, and it's just like these discrete, amazing things of performance that I adore, and of course, music being more typical with with the song. So, how's the book doing? Like, where's it getting? like
It's not doing well, Ken. It's not doing well.
Not like, I'm not saying if it's number 3. I'm not saying oh, all right. I asked the author question. No, not if it's number 3 on the Amazon list of dark zombie visceral. No, not on that list. But what are people saying when they encounter it?
Yeah, I like that as a litmus test for how it's doing, rather than who or how many people have read it. Well, that's the thing. Not enough people have read it for me to. I'm really squinting my way through an answer to this question. But
well, how about this part? Like you had mentioned that the level of that a personal and putting that out there. Let's just talk about the initial effect of you doing that? Was that a leap for you? Writers are brave, but was that a jump?
Um, I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about how, I don't know, I think part of, I don't want to say what I'm grieving or what feels strange about this book for me is that I almost made it and I don't want to say a test to myself, but it was maybe a challenge to myself in some ways. Like, my last book, like a lot of it was me trying to kind of bridge the gaps in a relationship that I knew was going to end. And it was kind of a book full of vulnerability and self-exposures, but they were self-exposures related to a marriage that I realized by the end I was going to have to say goodbye to. And this is a more, feels like a more direct kind of self-exposure. Like I was very conscious and very anxious in my novel, Failure to Thrive, of writing toward these territories, writing about this place that I didn't grow up in, kind of as a way to like synthesize elements of my own background and my own interest that I saw in the place that my ex-husband grew up. So it felt like there was a lot of myself in that book, but it was like a lot of myself by way of writing about others, and myself in terms of finding an efficacious way, or the most efficacious way, and the most responsible way of writing about others, or maybe examining myself by way of writing about
I like
others.
examining.
Yeah,
like
maybe that's another word entirely.
I think that's part of my compulsive problem, examining way too much.
It's like some kind of syndrome. But yeah, this book felt different. Like I think after I wrote and published that book that was kind of examining myself by way of others, I needed to write something that was more of a directly personal self-exposure. And not only is it like kind of an exposing personal book, but like it has, so the long story short, I had wanted to work with my friend Devin Stakonis, who had been talking about doing this art project where she wanted to go into morgues and do kind of still life drawings, I guess you'd call them, of the bodies. But she wanted to like draw them in such a way that the contours of the flesh resembled landscapes. Because she deals a lot. Well, now she deals a lot in the intersections between landscape and the body. But this project, as she was conceptualizing it, felt in some ways like the germination of a direction that she's now going more and more in. But I thought, landscapes and bodies and corpses, like this is perfect for the book. Like if you come up with some good ones, maybe that could be the cover, and maybe we could even do some illustrations like that. But she didn't end up getting to do this project. They wouldn't give her permission to illustrate the corpses. So I said, well, just draw me like I'm a corpse. I have kind of a corpsey, double jointed arm and hand. So I'm also like naked on the cover of my own book. And I was like, well, it's a good enough book, but like you think like that'll get people to buy it and read it, but apparently not.
But it's you as a corpse, so it's, there's that distancing. So
yeah, but it's difficult to write the book that you really wish you had when you were a younger adult. Feeling good about the fact that it's out there in the world for people to find, but feel like no one has the capability to find it. And that's sometimes the curse of publishing with small presses, and sometimes the curse of being the kind of writer who is stubborn about doing their own thing. But yeah, I'm still struggling, honestly, to reconcile what the book means to me and what I would like for it to be able to be to other people, and its lack of ability to find an audience. But I've also been trying to keep in mind that people don't always discover things when you expect them to discover them. It's been the same with our band. Like, our band has existed in effect for 13 years, and people are kind of like just starting to discover us, and we're just starting to take off in a way. And to one end, it's very exciting, of course, but to the other end, I and to a much greater degree, Sean, are like, well, where have you been this whole time? Like,
right.
People have talked about our last album, like assuming it's our first album. It's like, no, we made 3 other albums.
Yeah.
they're real albums. You can still listen to them.
Yeah. There was one cool thing I was thinking about Chicago. I'd forgotten. Been wanted to do more zines from the podcast, and there's like one issue. I call it a rare issue, and maybe it is, but I don't know if they still have it over there. But it was on the shelves at Quimby's bookstore.
Oh, I love Quimby's.
Yeah. I don't know. So if you're traipsing around that area, maybe poke in. I don't know if it'll still be on the shelves. It's from a couple years ago. But anyways, gorgeous, wonderful, lovely bookstore, Quimby's. Thanks for having the podcast scene on your shelf. So I got to get out another issue or two to have it be, irregular printing schedule. The podcast scene is.
Quimby's is a great bookstore. Like, speaking of places to discover things, and like, yeah, it's an invaluable resource.
I would say, like I went there, and I think it's the type of store when you have like particular type of mind, curiosity, never seen this before, and wanting to be an environment where you see 100, 200 things that you never seen before. But I found this like it's where I could find a book, independent published, and the book was Kathy Acker in Seattle. And it was like a study of the writer Kathy Acker and what she did in Washington and what she did in Seattle and how she was involved with Riot Girls. And I'm like, yeah, that's the rabbit hole. I'm glad somebody put all that together in the interviews. And it's that type of thing with the bookstore. I never know that fucking things exist, like Kathy Acker in Seattle. There's, how many copies of it, but it's exactly on that point. You're there at Quimby's, you're like, or at Powell's, where I found your book, right? Like, I'm like, how else do you encounter? You're like, oh, what is this? Like, wonderful, curious thing. And so, yeah, shout out to Quimby's and great bookstores. And everybody, make sure you check out, Meghan Lamb's work, the one I found, Coward, and the music from Kill Scenes. Megan, I do have another big philosophical question for you.
Okay.
And yeah, and it is the titular question from the show. And the question itself is, of course, is why is there something rather than nothing?
I think well, I guess my short answer is, in the interest of developing a shared language or a sense of community around something, to feel less alone, um, but also to explore the evolution of a something, like what something becomes over time, uh, rather than just living in this atemporal uh, nothingness, or this, yeah. That's probably as close as I'm going to come to finding my way through that question. But yeah, there is something rather than nothing, to bridge the gaps, to fill the void, um, to bring us together both in liminal temporality, and to help us see where we've come from, and where we might be going via
I,
something.
I like what you said about, like, for I heard quickly with the temporality and like space and time, and that comes up like being placed in space and time, that there's something there rather than a void, like existence within space and time. Um, yeah, I dig on that question. And for me, it's like creativity too. So, like I say, the show is art and philosophy and liberation, and for me, I think they're all the same thing. Like inquiry and exploration with art. Megan, people got to find your stuff, and where do people go for the kill scenes, for Meghan Lamb writing for your stuff?
Well, for Kill Scenes, my band, we have we're on Bandcamp, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Music, we're on all the things. There's some site somewhere, I forget what it's even called, that like brings all of them together. But we're on all of the streaming services. But Bandcamp is probably the best place to find all of our things, and buy the albums. But and my latest book, Coward, is on Spite and Deuvel. My novel is on Apocalypse Party. My collection, um, uh, all of your most private places, should be, or last I checked, it's still available on Spork. Sometimes I've heard people tell me that they've struggled to get my book on Spork sometimes, but ostensibly my last collection can be purchased from Spork Press. My novella that I wrote before that, Silk Flowers, sadly is out of print, but if you make your way through my oeuvre and you really want to go back that far, I can send you a PDF.
Wow, that's absolutely wonderful. What about kill scenes? Where to find? You play a bit in Chicago at all, or?
Yeah, we do, and we've been starting to tour a little bit throughout the Midwest. We're hoping at some point to make our way out further east and further west, but we all have day jobs that make that difficult, and we all have jobs with radically different schedules. But yeah, we play all over Chicago. We're taking a break for a few months from playing shows while we work on the fifth album. But yeah, we try to update our shows on Bandcamp, so you can find where we're playing there if you are in the Chicago area, or in the Midwest, or maybe if and when we branch out further.
Now, what's interesting about the single, the cover of Short Term Effect. I just thought about that song, prior to getting on here, and I was like, that's a Cure song, which this isn't usually the case with me, where I've never really cared what the lyrics were. That's something that's really strange for me to say, particularly for a Cure song. But it's one of those songs like you find off that area in pornography and faith, where it's all mood and feeling, and Robert Smith's a beautiful poet, writer.
Yeah,
But
it has like, it makes you feel a certain way, and it really precisely evokes a feeling and an atmosphere. But if you try to interpret it, if you try to break it down, it really it feels very indecipherable very quickly. It really resists interpretation. But
yeah,
I think we all like that about the song.
I know, because it's a really different thing, because when like a ballad of lament, and we know the Cure lyrics, where you're listening and hearing about the story that's there, and there's some of those atmospherics where, like, because I looked up, I had literally typed in, what is the meaning of a short term effect? Like, it's something I would never do, and I did that, and I was like, well, it's impressionistic, and just dig on the song and the feel on that one. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my personal, I don't want to say interpretation, because I don't know that it's a song that even wants to be interpreted, but I think I started to align that phrase with my experience of the madness of liminality with
Yeah.
the pandemic. The pandemic is a short-term effect.
Yeah, that's what it is. That
Yeah.
wasn't about. It was a presage of the horrors of the pandemic and smoke in the air. Meghan, such a blast to have you on the show and to learn about kill scenes and your writing, and talk some of Chicago. My favorite art museum in the world is in Chicago, the Art Institute. I adore that museum so much, and really like Chicago. But yeah, thanks for coming on to the show and kicking it around on something rather than nothing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I hope that Kill Scenes does, despite the disjointed schedules amongst everybody, but there is a wonderful goth bar called the Coffin Club in
I know,
Portland.
no, I've wanted to go there for a long time. I see bands playing there all the time. Like, oh, it looks so sick.
It was really good. Now, I had been to this particular place. It was called the Lovecraft Bar before that, and I don't remember it being as big. I think they might have expanded it. Then it was closed. And then I went to the Coffin Club a couple times, and it was full. Like, went too late to try to get in. But on Friday and Saturday, made it in both times. And yeah, really, really digging on that. And with your interview coming up, Short Term Effect, it was like a nice full vibe. So yeah, to the kill scenes at the Coffin Club. Even saying that's the sentence. The kill scenes at the Coffin Club. I'm already hyping you. All right, so thanks so much, Meghan, and really look forward to hearing some more of your music and your beautiful writing.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of your Monday.
You too.
Bye.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.
And listeners, to stay connected with us and our guests, visit somethingratherthannothing.com. Join our mailing list for exclusive updates and access to guest-created art. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast platform. People really read that shit. Your support helps us reach more listeners and spread our community across the planet. This is a global show, and we like to give a shout out to our many listeners across the world, including many listeners in Canada, Spain, Germany, UK, Argentina, Brazil, India, Thailand, and so many more places. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast for behind-the-scenes content. And the best way to help the show is to tell your friends about us. If you love it, they'll love it too. Tell your friends who love it. We love you. This is Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast.